Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're unpacking a high-stakes family property drama that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the process, it literally changed the landscape of Philippine law. We're looking at a completely fascinating case, Cueno versus Bautista. It's a case that forces us to navigate the really intricate and honestly sometimes treacherous waters of property rights, spousal consent, and the absolute ticking clock of the law.
So I want you to start by asking yourself a pretty wild question. Can a spouse secretly sell your property right behind your back? Seriously, imagine stepping into the shoes of someone who wakes up one day only to discover that their husband sold their shared conjugal land, and he didn't breathe a single word to them about it. I mean, how would you feel? But more importantly, what would you actually do? What exactly does the law say about your rights in that exact scenario? Well, that is the literal nightmare our protagonist found herself in.
Meet Flora Cueno. Her 45-year legal battle revolves around Lot Note 2836, which is this 7,991 square meter parcel of land. Flora and her husband, Eulalio, owned a share of this property together. But totally behind Flora's back, Eulalio secretly sold their share. And get this, he didn't just sell it to some random stranger off the street. No, he sold it to Flora's own father, Louis Bonifacio. I mean, talk about a betrayal hitting incredibly close to home, right?
Okay, let's dive into this timeline because the chronology here is absolutely mind-blowing. In 1961, Flora and Julio acquire the property. Just 2 years later, in 1963, Julio executes that secret sale to Flora's father. Fast forward in 1977, and Flora's father sells that very same property to a third party, the Bautista family. They move in, build houses, and literally live there for decades. Then, in 2008, a massive 45 years after the initial secret sale, Flora finally files a lawsuit to get her land back, claiming she never actually gave her consent. This huge gap in time isn't just some fascinating little detail, it is the exact hinge upon which this entire case swings.
Section 1. The core legal question: void or voidable?
For decades, Philippine courts had actually been issuing conflicting rulings on this exact scenario. To understand why this matters so much, we have to look at the stakes for Flora. Everyone agreed that the 1963 sale lacked Flora's spousal consent. That wasn't up for debate. But the legal classification of that sale, that changes everything. If the Supreme Court decides the contract is void, meaning it legally never even existed from day one, then there's no time limit to challenge it. Flora just gets her land back. But if the contract is voidable, meaning it's technically valid until someone steps up to cancel it, then a very strict time limit applies. Flora's entire 45-year quest hinges completely on the difference between those two distinct legal words.
Section 2. The Masterclass: Void versus Voidable Contracts.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how massive the binary difference between these two concepts really is. I want to equip you with the exact tools to crack this case. A void contract is inexistent from the very start. It has zero force, zero effect. Legally, it's basically a ghost. It can't be fixed or ratified later, and there's no time limit to challenge it in court. A voidable contract, on the other hand, is a very real binding agreement. It's perfectly valid until it is formally annulled. It can be ratified, meaning the wrong party can actually agree to it after the fact, and crucially, there is a strict ticking clock on how long you have to challenge it.
So let's look at the deeper definition of a voidable contract. It's a situation where one party maybe lacked the legal capacity to give consent, or maybe their consent was ruined by fraud. But the law basically says, look, we aren't going to automatically delete this contract. Instead, it produces real, tangible legal effects. The buyers can move in, they can build houses, they can live their lives. It remains a binding contract until the aggrieved party, like the wife whose consent was bypassed here, actively steps up and successfully challenges it in court. If she does nothing, well, the contract stands permanently.
Section 3. The shift in the law: the evolution of consent.
To figure out which rule applies to Flora's dilemma, we actually have to take a step back, and it builds this totally fascinating picture of the progression of women's property rights. Under the old Spanish Civil Code, pre-1950, a husband had absolute power. He didn't need his wife's consent to sell conjugal property at all, and the sale was perfectly valid. Then, from 1950 to 1988, the new Civil Code stepped in to protect the wife, requiring her consent. But if he went ahead and sold it anyway, the sale was merely voidable. Finally, post-1988, the modern Family Code brought in equal joint administration. So under today's law, a sale without the other spouse's consent is completely void.
So the crucial point is this: we have to look at the exact date of the secret sale. Because Eulalio sold the property to Flora's father in 1963, Flora's rights fell strictly under the jurisdiction of the new Civil Code, specifically Articles 166 and 173.
The Supreme Court noted that, sure, while today's family code would render that kind of secret sale totally void, they had to apply the law exactly as it existed back in 1963.
Section 4. The Supreme Court's verdict, the ticking clock.
By zeroing in on the new civil code, the Supreme Court finally settled the conflict, and their verdict essentially came down to a ticking clock. 10. Under Article 173 of the new civil code, the Supreme Court emphasized that Flora had a strict 10-year window to ask the courts for an annulment. The law explicitly stated that the wife may, during the marriage and within 10 years from the questioned transaction, ask the courts to annul the secret sale. That 10-year period, that was the literal lifeline the law gave her to take action.
But here is the stark contrast. 45. Flora waited 45 years to take action. She sued in 2008 for a transaction that went down in 1963. What could have been a totally simple, straightforward annulment of a voidable contract if she had just acted by 1973 instead became this tragedy of expired rights. The dry, legal concept of a statute of limitations literally became the undeniable crux of this entire family drama.
So let's look at the step-by-step legal mechanics of how the court actually ruled here. Step 1. The 1963 sale was indeed executed without Flora's consent. Step 2. Under the law at that specific time, this made the contract voidable, not void, which immediately triggered that 10-year deadline. Step 3. That deadline expired in 1973. And finally, Step 4. Because her action prescribed, the Supreme Court ruled that she completely lost the right to challenge the sale. So the current owners, the Bautista family, who had bought the land in 1977 in good faith, they legally get to retain the property.
Now, to ensure this kind of confusion never happens again, the Supreme Court delivered this definitive drop-the-mic conclusion. They stated, to put an end to this recurring conflict, the court now hereby adopts the second view and holds that a sale that fails to comply with Article 166 is not void, but merely voidable, in accordance with Article 173 of the Civil Code. With just that single paragraph, the court definitively abandoned all those old, confusing cases and set the record totally straight for any similar disputes spanning that 1950 to 1988 era.
Which leaves us with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Do you know what legal code governs your own property rights today? I mean, this explainer isn't just about some 45-year-old family feud. It's a testament to the fact that the law is a living, evolving thing with very real deadlines. Understanding whether your rights fall under the old civil code or the modern family code isn't just fun trivia. It literally dictates the actual ticking clocks attached to your assets. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive into the source material. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.